When you try to save your first significant sum of money, the process is intensely physical. Every single dollar gets there because you earned it, and you deliberately chose not to spend it. You are essentially dragging your entire net worth uphill by hand. You force yourself to put money in. Then rent is due and money comes out. You put a little more in, and the grocery bill is higher than expected. It feels exactly like running on a treadmill. You are exerting massive amounts of energy, making constant sacrifices, and achieving zero forward progress. That specific cycle, intense effort followed by immediate, unavoidable erasure, is exactly why getting a wealth-building plan off the ground feels impossible. Then you hear the golden rule of personal finance. People say that once you manage to save your first $100,000, the entire system changes. They say the second $100,000 arrives much faster. If you are currently sitting on $3,000 in savings, that sounds like a meaningless platitude wealthy people use to feel good about themselves. But it is a strictly measurable rule of mathematics. To prove it, you have to take one immediate step. Grab a piece of paper and write down your exact current savings balance today. Stop guessing the number. Write it down in a box. That figure is not a judgment on your work ethic or a measure of failure. It is simply raw data. It is your starting line. You cannot map a mathematical route to that $100,000 threshold until you lock in your precise starting coordinate. It took me years to cross that six-figure mark. I watched the balance crawl by a few dollars a week. I picked up extra work, I skipped dinners and vacations, I cut my spending down to the bone, and it still felt incredibly slow. The early days are slow because of one mechanical constraint. Your paycheck is the sole source of forward momentum. Your accumulated money is dormant, producing a few dollars in interest. Market gains barely register. Your labor does 99% of the heavy lifting. Relying exclusively on your own willpower and physical labor to fund your savings is exhausting. Over a long enough timeline, it is completely unsustainable. Then, life introduces financial friction. The car needs new tires. The dentist sends a bill you did not see coming. Your landlord raises the rent. When your balance is small, these everyday realities interact violently with your savings. Take a look at this bar chart tracking incremental savings. Notice how months of disciplined, linear effort can be completely erased by one single moderate expense. A perfectly normal setback mathematically wipes out half a year of hard work. Watching that balance drop back down to near zero after months of telling your friends you can't go out takes a massive psychological toll. Below $100,000, your account simply lacks the gravitational mass to absorb financial friction. Without that mass, a routine repair bill goes from a minor annoyance to a catastrophic hit to your momentum. Building wealth relies entirely on an exponential curve. This is a mathematical progression where growth continually multiplies on itself, rather than moving in a flat, predictable straight line. This graph maps time against net worth. Early on, the line stays flat, unable to outpace living expenses. But reaching critical mass, the line bends upward. Your money earns its own money. These new earnings generate returns entirely independent of your paycheck. That $100,000 mark is the precise mathematical threshold where the curve finally steepens enough to outpace your physical labor. 100,000 is not a magic number. It is simply the baseline where the percentages finally work in your favor. Looking at this timeline, you can see the scale of the acceleration. The bracket required to get from 0 to 100,000 is massive, but the segment to reach the next 100,000 is dramatically compressed. So look again at that starting number you wrote down earlier. Do not judge it. Do not feel exhausted by it. Acknowledging that exact baseline is the only way to begin the climb. You have to build the manual foundation first, so the math can eventually take over. Think of building your initial savings like rolling a snowball down a hill. When it first starts out, you are doing all the physical work. You are packing the snow with your hands and pushing it forward. But as that snowball gathers mass, the physics shift. It starts picking up snow on its own. Eventually, the sphere is growing faster from its own momentum than from your pushing. That self-feeding cycle is compound growth. In finance, this means your invested money earns returns. Those returns are added to your balance, and then that larger balance earns even bigger returns the next time around. This chart visualizes a scenario where you put $500 a month into a diversified investment account, which is simply a portfolio spread across many different stocks and bonds to manage risk. After 5 years, you have manually contributed $30,000. Look at the earned growth resting on top. It is basically a fraction of a sliver. The gap between the exact dollars you put in and what the account earned is incredibly small. Every dollar of progress right now comes directly from your effort. You are doing almost everything, and the math is generating practically zero passive momentum. Jump ahead 15 or 20 years, and the returns start stacking on top of each other. The gap between what you contributed out of pocket and what your account is actually worth gets significantly wider. The primary burden of wealth generation has officially transferred from human labor to mathematical momentum. That dynamic is exactly why people who have navigated this process say, the stretch from the first $100,000 toward $1 million feels significantly less difficult than the initial grind. $1 million is an intimidating total number, but by the time you are aiming for it, a much larger share of the overall growth is coming from the account itself. Building massive wealth relies heavily on surviving the slow, early phase long enough to trigger that mathematical tipping point where the money begins working independently. A larger income absolutely helps, but the idea that building a large net worth is mostly about earning a massive salary is mathematically incorrect. This double line graph tracks two paths. A moderate earner who saves consistently for 20 years ultimately overtakes someone earning twice as much starting a decade later. The math ignores job titles. It prioritizes early starts, savings amounts, and leaving your money alone. Early, consistent action accelerates wealth far faster than a delayed start on a six-figure salary. There is, however, an important reality to this process. Compound growth does not travel in a perfectly straight, smooth line. Markets go up and down. You will experience years where your balance drops, even though you continue depositing part of your paycheck every single month. That is an uncomfortable position to be in. But over long periods, the historical direction for broadly diversified investments points consistently upward. The flat, frustrating curve at the beginning is just the grind required to build your base. Once that base is established, the math bends the curve upward and takes over the heavy lifting. But getting to that point requires avoiding a few specific traps. There are common behavioral mistakes that keep savers stuck in that slow, early phase much longer than they need to be. Surviving the initial stretch means enduring the inevitable market drops without pulling your money out. You have to stay invested long enough for the math to have a chance to work. Reaching your first $100,000 is the hardest financial milestone you will face. And for a lot of people, progress simply stalls out long before they ever get close to that number. The immediate assumption is usually that you simply do not earn enough money. You look at your balance, look at your paycheck, and conclude that the only way to break through the plateau is to secure a massive raise. But the math tells a different story. The hurdles keeping people stuck below six figures are actually 5 invisible mistakes hidden in everyday habits and personal infrastructure. If you treat wealth building entirely as an income problem, you guarantee you will remain stuck below that target threshold. Because no matter how many raises you get, a broken financial structure will drain every extra dollar. Let's start with the first mistake: treating your savings like a backup checking account. You put money away with good intentions, but then a trip with friends comes up, or a sale you do not want to miss. This chart illustrates what happens when wants feel urgent. You dip in once, then again. These minor, sporadic withdrawals silently drain the accumulated capital. Instead of a compounding foundation, the account functions as a revolving door. This feeds directly into the second mistake, the perfectly logical trap of delaying your savings until a future milestone. You tell yourself you will start saving real money when you finally pay off a loan, or when you move somewhere cheaper. The flaw in this logic is lifestyle expansion. As your income goes up, your everyday spending expands right alongside it to match. Waiting for perfect saving conditions is a trap. The goalposts of what feels like enough money continuously shift outward, and that perfect starting point never actually arrives. Our third mistake shifts from how you save to where you keep your money, specifically leaving all your capital exactly where it is easiest to access. When every dollar you have sits in a single pooled account attached to a debit card, spending requires zero effort. It is psychologically dangerous because there is absolutely no friction. You lose the moment of pause required to stop and ask whether a purchase is actually worth slowing your progress. While your money sits in that accessible account, you also pay the invisible cost of earning virtually zero interest. By prioritizing the convenience of keeping everything in one place, you remove all the barriers that protect your money from yourself. It flows out faster than it can build. The physical mechanics of spending are only half the battle. The fourth mistake is a psychological roadblock, staring directly at the massive final number instead of focusing on incremental progress. This visualization shows the massive empty gap between a small starting balance like $6,000 and a towering six-figure target. When you only have one distant goal with no smaller checkpoints in between, every month feels exactly the same. That distance becomes demoralizing, and demoralized people quietly give up. Which brings us to the fifth mistake. You open social media and immediately see a 25-year-old sharing a massive net worth milestone, while you feel completely behind. You are comparing your Chapter 3 to someone else's Chapter 10. It ignores entirely different incomes, varying costs of living, and totally different family situations. These comparisons simply provide a convenient internal justification to delay your efforts or abandon your financial plans entirely. Starting late absolutely makes the climb harder, but progress is always possible, as long as you stop using comparison as a reason to hold off. Notice that none of these 5 roadblocks are defined by your salary. They are structural issues rooted in your habits and your mindset. This diagram contrasts that chaotic, leaking system with a deliberate, closed-loop financial structure. To start accelerating your wealth, you have to actively rebuild your personal financial architecture to support retention instead of consumption. Crossing the $100,000 threshold does not happen by accident. It is the deliberate result of eliminating these 5 structural errors. Take a look at this graph hovering above our saver, trying to reach their first $100,000. You'll notice a long, flat line. Early progress is mathematically slow and merely invisible. This creates a situation where most people quit before the numbers have a chance to compound. To get through this exact stretch, you need a system. We are going to walk through a 7-step roadmap designed specifically to push you past that flat line and build real momentum. Making it through this early phase relies on something more robust than sheer willpower. It requires a background system doing the heavy lifting. Step 1. Open a high-yield savings account. This account must be housed at a completely different bank than your everyday checking account. Placing these funds in a separate bank provides physical and digital separation from your everyday spending accounts. When your savings live somewhere else, you do not see that balance every single time you buy groceries. By putting the money out of sight, you create friction, making it harder to access on impulse and turning vulnerable cash into protected money. Step 2. Pick a manageable amount, even if it is just $25 or $50, and set up an automatic transfer for every single payday. The timing on this is strict. You have to schedule that transfer for the day after your paycheck arrives. A lot of people try to save whatever happens to be left over at the end of the month. In practice, there is almost never anything left over. By paying yourself first automatically, you remove the need for daily discipline. You simply force your spending habits to adapt to a slightly smaller checking balance. To execute Step 3, pull your bank statements from the last 3 months and average every dollar that went out. Rent, utilities, subscriptions, everything. This true baseline is often shockingly higher than what people assume they spend. Once you have protected savings, automated transfers, and a confirmed spending baseline, you already have more financial structure in place than most people ever built. Step 4 is to set a realistic 90-day savings target. Forget about the $100,000 for a moment. Pick a short-term number, like $500 or $2,000. Committing to a series of short, achievable sprints helps you cover significantly more ground than preparing for one massive race that you never feel ready to start. This graph charts the mechanics of compound growth over time. Step 5 is to put this curve to work. Once you have a basic emergency cushion, begin investing small amounts into a broad market index fund. An index fund tracks a basket of stocks, letting you own pieces of many companies. Getting in early activates compound growth. The math feels slow during this flat period, but every month invested pushes you closer to that upward bend. Step 6 accelerates this process. Every quarter, increase your automatic savings rate by roughly 1% of your paycheck. Bumping your contribution by just 1% is a tiny change. It is small enough to go unnoticed in your day-to-day spending, yet it adds up to significant progress by the end of the year. Saving automatically, investing consistently, and gently escalating your contributions is the precise mechanism that bends the growth curve in your favor. This balance model shows Step 7, tracking your net worth. Pick a day, like the first of the month, to measure your assets against your liabilities. Add up everything you own, subtract everything you owe, and commit that final number to a written monthly record. Over time, you will see that personal net worth number move. Watching it climb with your own real numbers is one of the most powerful motivational tools you can use. The first $100,000 is the hardest money you will ever build. This happens because the initial math relies entirely on your own accumulation, rather than the power of compound growth. But once your automated system is running and enough time passes, the math shifts. The pace of wealth creation accelerates as your money starts making money, making the road toward $1 million feel entirely different. The challenge is simply staying the course through the long initial stretch where the numbers barely move. If this made the path to your first 100,000 feel clearer, tap like. Share this with someone who is currently stuck in that early financial grind. Comment first 100,000 if that is the milestone you are chasing next, and subscribe for new videos every week. I will see you in the next one.